this constant back and forth, and the answer is what will it take for one side or the other finally to get the upper hand? What will it take basically for this revolution to be fulfilled? Well, these are a couple of the questions that I will be posing with our guest this half hour. I'd like to turn first of all to London and welcome Director of Viewpoint Africa, Ayo Johnson. Thank you so much for joining us. Your perspective on the status quo at this point in time, because it seems that there's this constant battle of gaining and losing towns. What do you think that finally has to happen, let's say, for the revolutionary forces to gain the upper hand and keep the upper hand?
I think the situation is very serious. Clearly, I think the coalition has a problem. The first problem they have currently is that they can't distinguish between Gaddafi's men and the rebels on the one hand, because since they've taken away Gaddafi's military in terms of his air power, Gaddafi's men have actually melted into the ground, and there's very little demarcation between them and the rebels, and it makes it that much more harder to distinguish between the two. And of course, civilians are also in the line of fire. So I personally think that the situation is very, very serious, simply because when you're discriminately bombing the land, bombing in particular locations, it becomes very, very difficult to distinguish who you're bombing at and who's likely to be affected. Moving forward, I think that the rebels are clearly have to be. They've got special forces on the ground who are going to be training these rebels to be able to inflict, take the battle to Gaddafi's forces, and that wouldn't surprise us. But so it's going to be very disorganized, very disjointed moving forward, and it remains to be seen exactly how it will pan out.
Okay, let me turn to Oxford in the UK. Former British Ambassador to Libya. I'd like to welcome Ambassador Oliver Miles. Thank you so much for joining us, Ambassador Miles. What's your take? Our guest in London, Mr. Johnson, said when you're bombing from the air, it's hard to discriminate who's who from the ground. Of course, this in response right now to reports that the coalition forces have killed 10 civilians now on the ground. What's your take on that, sir? And welcome to the program.
I think I'm not a military expert, but I think that the military solution is not there. I think that when you think about this, what we have essentially is the government forces under Gaddafi in Tripoli, and several hundred miles away across the desert we have the rebels in strong position in Benghazi. In between, there's a road which has some towns on it, but not very important towns mostly. Most of them are quite small. It also has some strategically important oil installations and so on. It doesn't seem to me that either side is going to be able to win the war, so to speak, by military means, because there's no way that the rebels can get sufficient supplies of petrol and ammunition and weapons and people to mount an assault on Tripoli, and no way that the government could do the same for Benghazi, particularly when you think that the government have to worry about the possibility of airstrikes from the coalition forces if they are moving, for example, tanks or heavy guns across the desert. I think it's a deadlock.
Okay, so Ambassador, a deadlock, does it then, do you foresee a diplomatic solution at this point in time?
I can't see a diplomatic solution. No, I think it's quite possible there'll be a political solution, not in the sense of a deal, of an agreement. I don't think there's room at the moment for an agreement, although we heard of this offer of a ceasefire and its rejection. I think that's shadow boxing. I don't take that very seriously at the moment. I don't think those were genuine offers or accepted as genuine offers. But there could be a political solution in the sense that one side or the other will simply lose morale, lose support, and therefore be unable to continue. Of course, most outside observers and people in Britain, and I myself, am hoping that the support that Gaddafi has at the moment will melt away as it becomes clear that he can't possibly restore his authority over the whole country. But it may not happen like that. We may have a military deadlock and a political deadlock as well.
Okay, let me turn to Manchester. Chairman of Libya Watch, Mr. Mohamed Abdul Malek. Welcome to the program, Mr. Abdul Malek. And what do you see being the answer? Do you think that there can be a political solution at this point in time, being that there seems to be a military stalemate?
Yes, it seems that way. However, in my opinion, the Libyan people cannot afford to negotiate definitely with Colonel Gaddafi, cannot afford to let Gaddafi continue to be in power, even if on a limited part of Libya, because the repercussion of that will be immense. The Libyan people have made quite significant sacrifices, but these sacrifices will be nothing compared with what Colonel Gaddafi will do if he gains power. And not only in Libya, I'm afraid also in Europe and the rest of the world. Colonel Gaddafi, if he gains power, he will have repercussions against the Europeans and against the West. We will see terrorist attacks in Europe, and therefore this man cannot be allowed, I repeat, cannot be allowed to rule in one form or another. And what is being on offer now is get rid of Colonel Gaddafi, let Gaddafi get out, and we will negotiate after that with whoever remains, including some, not all of his children. Those who are implicated in murdering Libyan people, we want them out as well. However, those children of his who have not put their hands in blood, we are willing to negotiate. We're willing even to offer them to continue to stay in Libya in some form or another. So the whole problem, the whole thing hinges on Colonel Gaddafi. If Colonel Gaddafi goes, then anything is possible. If he remains, then we will continue to struggle to get rid of him. We will need help, definitely. Unfortunately, that in such cases where you have a no-fly zone and you have strategical strikes, it is expected to have some civilian casualties. Up to date, our information is that these casualties have been minimal, if any at all, because our information of the civilian casualties comes from the national Libyan TV, which cannot be trusted. However, today there were some friendly fire that killed some Libyan fighters, some Libyan revolutionary fighters, and this is unfortunate. But this can happen anywhere where you have such a struggle. And the notion that the NATO or the coalition cannot distinguish between Gaddafi's forces and revolutionary forces is not 100% correct, because we must bear in mind that this has been going on now for about 10 days or more. And to date, we haven't had a friendly fire incident except today. I think the chances of that happening is there, but they are minimal. And I think that the coalition and the NATO forces can distinguish between these different forces. However, mistakes do happen, and we accept that. As Libyan people, we accept that these mistakes can happen. However, the best way to minimize these mistakes or these errors is to liaise with the forces on the ground, with the Libyan revolutionary forces on the ground, if that is at all possible. And also the other thing is the arming of the Libyan revolutionary forces. If the Libyan forces, the Libyan revolutionary forces could be armed, then I think the push towards the West and towards Sirte and towards Tripoli will become even faster and possible. But I repeat myself that it hinges on Gaddafi, and Gaddafi must go. After Gaddafi, we could have a political solution, we could have a ceasefire, we could negotiate, we could do a lot of things. And the other point is that definitely Gaddafi's inner circle is crumbling with the defection of his foreign minister, Musa Kosa, who is implicated in many crimes against the Libyan people and against the people of the world. He is, for example, implicated in the bombing of Panam over Lockerbie. However, his is significant for a man of this caliber, so close to the inner circle. I think there will be many people around Gaddafi of the caliber of Musa Kosa and lower who will be revising their position right at this moment. And if they could get away, they will get away. And the significance of that is that these people realize that Gaddafi is losing. they are more from inside than anyone else, and they know the real situation of the Gaddafi. Musa Kosa, a person like Musa Kosa, would not jump ship unless he knows that it is sinking. And therefore we think that it is sinking, and we believe that we will be able to see the end of Colonel Gaddafi very soon.
Okay, well, let me get Mr. Johnson back in on this. Let me read something to you, Mr. Johnson, from the Asia Times today. It says, "You invade Bahrain, we take out Gaddafi in Libya. This, in short, is the essence of a deal struck between Barack Obama administration and the House of Saud." Two diplomatic sources at the United Nations independently confirmed that Washington, via Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, gave the go-ahead to Saudi Arabia to invade Bahrain and crush the pro-democracy movement in exchange for a vote from the Arab League of a no-fly zone over Libya. What's your take on that?
Well, it just shows how international politics works and who the true players are. I mean, it don't surprise anyone that these sort of deals would work around. I mean, governments, institutions, politicians are always flagging up deals that benefit their individual countries and their individual interests. So that's a fact. But in saying that, the deal that you just mentioned is very important because it just shows that the United States, the coalition, if at all they decide that that's what they want to do, they can go and achieve that. But in the case of Bahrain, and especially that of Libya, I think the Libyan government is in trouble. And the problem we've got currently is that the United Nations mandate doesn't allow regime change. So even if one were to wish it, that Gaddafi should go, which clearly he's been there for 42 years, he's created a lot of enemies, he's done a lot of bad things, and moving forward, his position is untenable. I can't see how he can stay. Nonetheless, the mandate by which you would otherwise want to remove him doesn't allow you to do so. So the current method of dealing with Gaddafi is wrong because the United Nations do not speak with one voice in resolving that issue. And it then leads to other undertones as to why we do not have the same type of treatment in places like Ivory Coast, where we find up to 1,000 people dying a day. And of course, we have conflicts in other parts of the Middle East with Bahrain, Yemen, and a whole raft of other countries. So there needs to be a consistent approach from the UN, from other institutions, and more so from politicians who are very visible in the world in terms of being true politicians, especially that of the Americans, that of the British, and very much of any other suitable player. So I think they should all speak with one voice, mean what they say, and do what they mean. So I think that's the problem with institutions, and that's been the problem with the UN all along.
Well, Mr. Mayos, Ambassador Mayos, what's your take on that there is a lack of consistency by the UN as far as how they have reacted in dealing with Libya, and as our previous guest said, how they have dealt with other situations, for example, situations that are taking place in Africa, like the Ivory Coast, or the situation in Bahrain. Why the difference in your perspective?
It makes me sad when I hear rubbish like that talk, frankly. I mean, people who put forward such amazing theories, it's very easy to do it. They ought to be asked to produce some evidence for what they say. There isn't any. I thought that the previous speaker was the interesting one because the fact is that this problem in Libya has got to be resolved by the Libyans. Now, I don't agree with everything that our previous speaker said about the balance of power between Gaddafi and the others and so on, but it's his country and it's his right to say what he says. It's not for us to tell them what to do. They must get on with it and do it themselves.
Okay, so you do not see any discrepancy? You do not see any difference in how the United Nations has reacted? For example, as our previous guest
said, the United Nations is a group of countries, each of which has its own opinions, it has its own position, has its own interests. It's perfectly obvious that had we gone to the United Nations, had we, that is to say Britain and France and America, gone to the United Nations and said, we want a mandate to throw Gaddafi out, we wouldn't have got it, would we? Because even the limited mandate we asked for, we had 5 members of the Security Council voting against it. If we'd asked for a mandate to throw Gaddafi out, it would have been vetoed if necessary, but probably not necessary because there wouldn't have been a majority for it. Now, that's the way the world is, I'm afraid. It's no good, blaming me or blaming anybody else for the fact that Britain doesn't always agree with Russia and China doesn't always agree with France and America doesn't always agree with Iran. That's the way the world is.
Right. It's not a matter of which country agrees. I think the situation also looking at the United Nations, that it is an entity that supposedly represents the international community. And
no, but what we do agree about, and it's in the United Nations Charter, is that national sovereignty means something. That Libya is Libya, and decisions about the future of Libya essentially have got to be taken by Libyans.
Okay, now let me turn back to Manchester, Mr. Abdul Malek. Mr. Abdul Malek, you being a Libyan, do you think that the ultimate solution is going to lie, or it does lie, in the hands of the Libyans? Are some factions in Libya actually turning more to the international community for direction as far as the future of Libya? Because the conference that took place in London was not only looking at the situation at present, but also the future of Libya. How do you see it?
Well, I tend to see the situation in this way, that I do believe that no country is isolated from the rest of the world, and that despite the fact that we would like to claim as Libyans that we are totally independent in making our decisions, but as you pointed out, the fact that what is happening in Libya is happening in Libya, and we've just had a conference in London. This conference suggested that the TNC, the Transitional National Council, open up its membership and includes head of tribes, so thus giving the tribes a more political power that did not exist in Libya to start with, is an example of how international intervention can add ingredients to the table, can add ingredients to what is being done. And we do agree that we invited and we welcomed and we are happy that there is a no-fly zone. This no-fly zone is implemented by the West. We also wanted strategic airstrikes, which the West has provided. So, yes, I think we are a major player in deciding what happens in Libya, but we must also accept that there is an interest. Everyone is interested in Libya, and therefore they do have a stake in what is going on. And we're willing to talk and share and come to mutual agreement to the different interests with the West, with the Arab world, with the Muslim world. We have to talk. We have to agree. We have to forge a relationship based on mutual interests. Therefore, the world does have an influence in what happens in Libya, and we accept that, and we would like to make the best of it. We are now asking the West to provide us with weapons, without which we might not be able to drive Colonel Gaddafi out of the country as soon as we would like. And why would the West arm us unless there is some benefits to the West in so doing, specifically getting rid of Colonel Gaddafi?
All right.
So I think the situation is mutual.
Okay. Mr. Johnson, your perspective on that, what our guest said was, why would the West arm the revolutionaries unless there's some interest for them to get out of it? Let's look at this whole scenario and the West in general getting involved in Libya. Their involvement in Libya, do you think that it was based on humanitarian factors, or is it because of their own interests?
Well, I mean, the interest to do with oil would never go away. I mean, we've had interest. It's always been mentioned that oil has been the crucial element to do with Libya. But nonetheless, Gaddafi has been in power for 42 years. It shows that there isn't democracy in Libya. That's a fact. So that had to change. And of course, he had bitten one too many issues, and he had taken the fight against the rebels, and besides, he had killed a lot of his civilians. So he found himself in the mess. There's no doubt about that. So the coalition has come about because he's violated international law. He's very much been asked to stop, and he hasn't. And if it means that the international world comes with full force against him, then he is to blame. But in terms of arming the rebels, the problem is the rebels they're not a qualified army as such, so they do not have the skills nor the knowledge, and training an army takes time. And even if you were to give them equipment, it takes time to learn to use those equipment. So that has always been the case with the rebels. And besides, you need a trained, hardened battle force to be able to engage an army that's been training for years to defend its own nation, the country. So I think the argument in terms of using the rebels is a good one. Arming them is also a good one, but it's going to take time. And in the current situation, I do not think that the international consensus, especially when it's moving forward, Libya is going to be based on how do you win over hearts and minds in Libya itself, how do you win hearts and minds in the Muslim world, how do you win hearts and minds internationally, and how do you keep the coalition going as a whole. The longer you are doing a campaign of this sort, the more likely are things to go wrong, and the more likely for things not to go your own way. So I think the longer it goes, the harder it becomes, and very much so it becomes that much more difficult. I think moving forward, who's to say? We could have a situation where Gaddafi would decide to go tomorrow, which would be good. It would be easier for everyone. But if he decides to dig his heels in, he'd be, very much like a wounded animal. He's at his most dangerous. Who's to say what he will do? So, and everyone that's going to lose out will be the Libyan people. It's their infrastructure that will be damaged. It's their people that would be lost in terms of lives. And it's their economy that will be in total ruin. So I think the Libyan people have to look at themselves and find very fast action and results. Or else, internationally, we're just going to have a situation like what we've seen in Afghanistan, what we've seen in Iraq, and more than likely what we've seen in Somalia. So, and don't forget that Libya is full of different factions, different cultural entities. And if you do not take that equation as to how the cultural mix is, how the tribes interact, then you find that's much more difficult keeping all the tribes together post-Gaddafi than it is to actually get Gaddafi out of power, which is what we've seen in Iraq.
All right, and on that note, I'd like to thank all my